Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Margery Theroux, and I'm the gallery director for the Michael Zakin Gallery in Demorest, New Jersey. I'm here with Kirk Maynard. He's our featured artist. He participated in our show Visual Thinking in January, and his artwork is also featured on our Facebook page, the Michael Zakin Gallery Facebook page right now. He's been working on a series of portraits that are gorgeous. So if you haven't seen them yet, please go look. They're really quite beautiful. So Kirk, give us an idea of how how things have changed for you because of the coronavirus, because of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, it's been a pretty big sea change because even like before kind of like the entire coronavirus pandemic, thing happened, there were some shows that I was going to be a part in 2020 that have been pushed back. And of course, working some residencies that also have been pushed back. And so that's kind of like the bad news for me. Like everything was getting pushed back in terms of kind of like showing things like that. But I have gotten a chance, because of kind of like the lockdown inside. So I guess this is kind of like the sunny side, if there ever is a sunny side of a pandemic, being able to work on some more of kind of like the projects that I've been really wanting to work on, expanding my Periphery series, my Serenity series, and working on that. But yeah, the lockdown has definitely changed how art practice has gone for a lot of artists, artists I've talked to as well, in terms of kind of like what they're doing,
Yes. A lot of people have been, were locked out of their studio space for a certain amount of time. Did you have that problem, or do you work where you live?
I work where I live right now.
Yeah. I do too. So I didn't experience that, but it must have been devastating to not be able to get to your studio, I would guess, for some people. And you also teach. So you began teaching online, as many of us had to do. So how is that going?
It's definitely interesting because I also teach. I teach at the high school level, and of course, in that area, we've transitioned totally to online. Once March hit, and of course, right now, I'm teaching some online college courses, a painting course, and it has been a very interesting to be part of that because I have kind of like used Zoom more than I have ever in my life. Of in Google Classroom, I've used it more than I ever had in the past, even though I have used it. So definitely switching to that medium where, it's online has been interesting because at the same time, you do lose some of kind of like that in-class feel of giving feedback right on the spot because you're able to see the work right there and you're able to kind of like give the feedback. But there are certain things that Zoom does, but I don't know, it can never take away from kind of like being there in person, even though you're able to kind of like do some of those similar things with kind of like focusing in on, what they're doing. But there is a loss of closeness to the students' work and of course what the students having issues with. But, it is what it is, I would say. And so in the meantime, I guess Zoom and Google Classroom will have to suffice for now.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you talk about your series that you are working on? I guess start with your portrait series because that's what we have up on the gallery site for people to see. So why don't you talk about that for a little bit?
Definitely.
Why, where did the idea come from, and the subjects? Are these people that that you're doing portraits of? Just a little bit about describe the series.
Yeah, definitely. So the series that I've been doing with kind of like a lot of the portraits, a lot of them are in the Serenity series. So I guess I'll speak about that. So for that series, I really wanted to focus on negative portraiture. Right? Because I've always been someone who's been interested in the face, right? I think the face is a very interesting thing. But when it comes to negative portraiture, I wanted to reappropriate how we see portraiture in our society, and kind of like, certain stereotypes that are attached to the portrait or to the black face in terms of what we're speaking about. And so it's really interesting because, I've had this experience before where, I'm always reading about something political, right?
Mhm.
Or I'm always looking at the culture, reading about, issues that are happening in the culture. And one of the things that I find that's pretty interesting is that there is this segment of our population that has a very strong racial animus towards minorities. And even if they wouldn't say it, in person, like face to face, they would say it over the internet, right? Because they have the opportunity to be anonymous. And,
Mhm.
under like certain, like, for instance, if there's like a certain mugshot, like there's some crime story on, let's say, NewJersey.com, right? Because I'm in the state of New Jersey. There would be kind of like in the comment section, this toxic sludge of people saying that, of course, he committed this crime because he's black. Of
Mm.
course, this person did this because they're black. And even on YouTube, you see it a lot. And even like YouTube is trying to wrestle with shutting down some of these sites that kind of like propagate some of these negative stereotypes about minorities. You see it where the talk of the channel is about the defect of the black race, right? With some type of negative mugshot of some black person, who committed some crime, or some black person who's just, has their face, online, and they're just using that to kind of like, say, this is how the black person is, right?
Mhm.
And it's something that I think, we sometimes ignore, even though we know is there. But it's a very big part of kind of like the anonymous nature of the internet. And one of the things that I'd really wanted to do was to take some of the negative energy from this and kind of reappropriate it in a positive way. Because at first, I guess it got me not upset, but I guess it got me kind of like, distraught a little bit. Because,
Mhm.
I would say, yes, our country has come this far, but there are people out there who still think these things, but don't say them unless it's on the internet, right? They're able to hide, right? They don't say it's about this black person unless they're able to hide. But then then again, I kind of like thought about, ways that I can make this positive. How can I reappropriate these negative images that the white supremacists, the white nationalists use, for their benefit, into something positive. And so I thought about the idea of the mugshot, the side profile. And you see it a lot, especially when it comes on to the civil rights leaders of the 1960s and even the 1950s. They would have their mugshots and, their own kind of like, the FBI especially would have kind of like these negative images of these civil rights leaders, to kind of propagate the idea that, they're in the wrong, right? Because that's kind of like the purpose that a lot of these mugshots serve, especially to kind of like the white supremacist elements of society. And so I really wanted to take that idea of these profiles and reappropriate them to create them something beautiful. Because I really think that there is power in the reappropriation of certain negative aspects in society. I don't think we should ever ignore them. I think it's very important to address some of these negative aspects, just because even if we ignore them, they're still there. In fact, they're able to grow when we ignore them, right? Because then they feel like they're, the oppressed ones, because they're kind of like hiding in the corner. They're speaking some type of truth to power when they're not, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that it's very important for us to bring it out into the open, bring out these ideas into the open, and not only to bring them out into the open, but see how we can take them back, take control back over this type of portraiture. And so that's one of the things I really wanted to do in my work, use some of these ideas for something that I think can be beautiful. And so a lot of these people, some of them are friends. Some of these people I just meet randomly, like on the street.
Mhm.
I was part of like this photography club, in New York City, every weekend. And, I had just people pose for me and take photos, of them to be able to use for references for my paintings. And so I think that there's definitely a powerful way to be able to take back some negative images that we see on the internet. And that was the purpose of the Serenity series that I was working on.
Mhm. Okay. And yeah, I mean, really, really interesting. And the artwork that I saw from that was really very impactful, where
Mm-hmm.
you'd have like a partial view of
Mm-hmm.
someone, right?
Yeah.
Um, the so do you want to talk about your portraits a little bit more? I mean,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
so
the previous work I'd seen of yours, what you were using oil pastels.
yes.
So
And
now
so
you're
for that work, yeah. And
yeah.
so the one that I was speaking about was the Serenity Series, which was the oil paintings. And so for the Periphery Series, which is the one that
The
you're talking
perfect.
about with the
Yeah.
oil pastels, for that specifically, I really wanted to deal with that idea of kind of like marginalization. And
Mm-hmm.
so when it came to some of those series, and those are the images where you see drawings of me, and it's basically myself with the hoodies on.
Uh-huh.
And so with those types of drawings, I really wanted to deal with the idea of stereotype threat. How does society affect the body language of the Black person, and how they expect to be seen in society. And so this really brought me to a very interesting fork in the road, I guess, because the idea started when I was an undergrad. Because during that period of time, I was at a school called Andrews University, and there was this very big divide in the school at that period of time between people who supported the Black Lives Movement. A lot of them were minorities, and the school Andrews had a large international population, and between a lot of people who did not support the idea. And so this was kind of like a clash of theology and what did it mean to be in support of social justice. And of course, this was also the time, 2010 to 2014, where the Black Lives Matter movement started, specifically with Trayvon Martin. And of course, the hoodie. And, they were definitely dealing with the idea of what the hoodie represented. What does it mean, to be Black in a certain space, right? And to be stereotyped as something other than, right? Or to be stereotyped wearing a certain type of dress that would suggest that you're waiting to commit a crime, right? Or that you're waiting to do something nefarious or something negative. And that really had an effect on me, and it got me thinking, but I never really thought about it in terms of creating artwork, right? It was just kind of like the political side of me that wanted to see a change in the way that stereotypes affected the Black person. And it was only until, recently, the last 2 years that I started formulating the idea of periphery, which is basically dealing with that idea and with those stereotypes. And so in the periphery work, what I have are, figures of me in these hoodies, in these different body language positions to deal with the idea of what does it mean? How does the body language of the Black person change in response to these stereotypes on the Black man with the hoodie or with that negative type of dress that we consider in society? And so in some instances, it's resignation, as you can see, and if you, when you're looking at the work, some instances, it's fear, some instances, it's very closed in. Right. And so I represent a lot of these issues in the actual work. And one of the things I also sought to do throughout it was basically to push the images to the side. And that was also a very big part of why I named it Periphery, because I wanted to deal with the margins. Right. So the idea of the Black body being marginalized and pushed to the side. So I'd have the image, I'd have the body language, I'd have the hoodie, the dress, and I'd have the person to the side to represent the idea of the person being on the margins. And I thought that was very important for kind of like developing that idea of what does it mean kind of to be Black in America and in these situations where you are always trying to protect your image because you feel that if you're letting down your image, then it's going to affect other Black people.
Right. I've also read recently people who are concerned for themselves because they have to wear masks.
Yeah.
Masks going into a store or something and automatically being, misidentified because, because is this person a robber or is this you know what I mean? It's like these stereotypes. And I know that there have been accounts of people who are afraid to walk around with a mask on.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely always on the back of a lot of people's minds, especially when you know that you will be stereotyped as, doing something shady. Right. So it is always at the back of them. I think that's kind of like the very interesting parts of kind of like being Black in America. You're always very aware of the stereotypes against you, even though people, we've come to a society where the social penalty for being loudly racist are there. I think you're still always you're always cognizant of kind of like the stereotypes that people have about your race, and it does affect your body language and how you operate. And I think that's kind of like the unfortunate part of kind of like the situation that we're in now, because in a truly race neutral society like people want to say it is, that would never be the case, right? You would never
Right.
feel like the need to have to conform to this specific idea of what you should be, right? It should be normal for us to just be themselves and not have to think about it. But
Right.
I've always, in the past years have found myself, thinking about this very issue. What does it mean? Not just what does it mean to be Black, but how are people looking at me? And am I being a good representative of the race? And that is the biggest issue with prejudice, right? It forces you to conform. It puts you in a certain box. And when you're in that box, then of course, the white nationalists, the white supremacists would say, of course, this is how he is, because they naturally, create the environment to try to put you in the box. And
Right.
so in a way, kind of like the Periphery series is to kind of like reveal, right? I'm always very big on revealing some of the more nefarious aspects of our society, and not just to reveal, but to allow freedom, right? In kind of like that dress through expression and hopefully education, because I've always been big on educating.
Are you still working on that series?
Yes, it's a continuing series. I'm actually adding some more work to that Periphery series. Today I'm going to be working on it as well. So yeah, it's an ongoing series that I don't think I want to stop. I think it's very crucial to kind of like continue on throughout every single year.
Yeah, it's from what I've seen of it, it's very impactful. And are you going to continue working with the oil pastels in that series so that they're all identifiable?
Yeah, there's something about oil pastels that I just love. I just love the closeness that you can get with it. And I love to blend with my hands. So I just kind of like love, blending with my hands and kind of like the proximity that isn't there when you're using a paintbrush or with a pencil. And so I just kind of like love the gritty nature, I guess, of the oil pastels, and kind of like the texture as well. It plays it brings me close to the work. And that's kind of like what I look for, something that brings me close to the work and makes it personal. And you can't get closer than, your hands to the actual paper.
Right. So what made you use, you're using acrylic with your portraits with the Serenity series?
Oh, so with the Serenity series, I'm using oil paint.
You're using
and I've always loved oil paint just because, I love to blend as I go. And acrylic, even though I could use kind of like a retarder for it, I just kind of like love like the ready-made idea of oil taking its time, and you can stop it one day and then come back to it and then add more onto it. So I just kind of like love the blend as you go feel to oil paint. I've just always been an oil painter. I just kind of love like the texture that it gives to the actual work. So I've been using paint for that.
Yeah, it's the creaminess is really,
yes, exactly, the creaminess.
It's really hard to resist. So what made you decide to paint the Serenity series rather than use the oil pastels?
For the Serenity series, I guess it was just kind of like I've always been very interested in oil painting anyway. And so I kind of like started in with that. But I think what made me diverge to the oil pastel for the Periphery series was just difference in kind of like the conceptual basis. And so because the Periphery series is more so revealing something gritty, while the Serenity series is more so about kind of like making something beautiful, right? And so I think that the oil paint really suffices for that, the idea of the creamy texture and everything else. I think because I'm revealing something very gritty in terms of the Periphery series, I want to use a different type of medium, which was the oil pastel, and get close to it. Because in a lot of ways, I'm using my own personal self. In the Serenity series, I haven't used my personal self in that, but in the Periphery series, for that portion, which was my MFA thesis, the Periphery series, I wanted to get something close that I would be able to kind of like really interact with. And so the oil pastel definitely was suited for that area.
Okay. And I'm guessing you're still working on the Serenity series as well.
Yes. So both of them are continuing projects. In fact, last week, I took a bunch of other references. I had a bunch of other models posed for me as well for those.
That's excellent. Okay, great. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your process or anything at all? I mean, you've explained very, very articulately about your two series that we are familiar with, or some of us are familiar with. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I guess the biggest thing that I want to say, since I've kind of like already explained some of the process, is just kind of like educate, because I've always kind of like been big on that. And I just want to just say that in terms of kind of like our society, I think the biggest thing that we have to wrestle with, all of us, is, what stereotypes that are present in society, and basically how to deal with them. And I think that it's very important to listen to, especially, marginalized voices, in these certain instances where they're talking about, what they experience in society, right?
Yeah.
Because I think listening is definitely the first step, because if you're not willing to listen, then you can be taken in by some of, the undertones of our society that seek to, propagate some of these negative ideas about Black people, about people in color in general. And so being willing to listen, I think, is a very big part of what, it's all about, being an activist. And I think that if there's anything I want people to take from my work, is to be very aware of the stereotypes that you hold in your heart, and be very cognizant of the fact that, not all people, are like the stereotypes. And, and even if they are, they deserve their humanity, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
that is something that's very crucial. Even if people do live up to the stereotypes, humanity is very important, because one of the first things that authoritarians in a lot of countries like to do is they like to take a segment or a stereotype, place it on everyone, right? And of course, oppress that specific group, right?
Yes.
And in order for us to not go down that path, we have to recognize the humanity of everyone, no matter whether they fall into the stereotype or not, because that's how we bridge that gap, bridge that racial divide. And I think that's what I want to do with my work: educate and bridge that gap between different people.
Okay, that's wonderful, Kirk. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and I'm hoping that people can visit your. Maybe should we put a few of your periphery images up on the Facebook page too, since you're talking about it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, send me a few of them.
Yeah,
And I'll
absolutely.
put up as well, so that people will understand what you're talking about with the Periphery series. Because
yeah, I'll just drop kind of like some of my information. So my website is kirkmaynardart.com, and on my Instagram page it's at Kirk Maynard Art, and Facebook is also Kirk Maynard's Art. So if you type in Kirk Maynard Art, you'll find it.
Find it there. Yeah, I think we did list it on your bio, so people go and look at that. They'll see it, because it's really important. I think the work you're doing is very important for many people to see.
Yes, definitely.
And I look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed this interview.
You're very welcome. And take care, stay safe, and stay healthy.
All right, you too. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you, Kirk. Bye-bye.